Well, hi everyone. I'm Brittaney Kiefer. I'm the creativity and culture editor at Campaign Magazine, and I'm hosting a session today for the D&AD Awards about insights from the advertising judges. Each of the judges here have judged different categories within advertising, and we're going to be talking about some of the standout work that they saw during the process. So first, let me introduce our judges. We have Jean Lin, who's the global CEO at Dentsu Creative Service based in Shanghai. Anya Dev is a senior art director at Wyden Kennedy. Senthil Kumar is chief creative officer of Wonderman Thompson India. Hira Mohabullah is executive creative director of BBDO Pakistan. Anais Hayez is head of YouTube consumer retail brands at Google. Michelle Jones is head of creative at the Greater London Authority for the Mayor of London's office. So we're going to start just talking about the work, and you looked at so much work during the process. So each of you will tell me about a piece of work that really stood out to you personally, that you really connected with or thought was interesting. So why don't we start with you, Hira? I think your pick is something that Reddit did, right?
Yeah. So I'll be talking about Reddit's superb owl. Just generally to start off, I love a piece of work that challenges the advertising rule book. Every once in a while, you get something that does that. But what this piece of work did was it took that book, it tore it up, and it threw it out the window. Mm-hmm. And there's just this sort of sense of utter disregard for following the rules there, and that's what I loved about it. And I remember when we were judging the work in the jury, somebody mentioned that this was a piece of work that they wouldn't have approved if it landed up on their table, and so it just made them feel very dumb, and and that's something that we really picked up on when we were discussing this piece of work there. It's rogue, it's irreverent, just like the brand itself. It just basically stumped everybody out there. The fact that we keep talking about advertising that's out of the box, and this was just that, a very classic example of while the world is zigging, you zag. And what's interesting is that people, a lot of publications wrote about it and said that it broke the Super Bowl, and it quite literally did that with its name too, because it kind of broke it up in these two odd words. It's called Superb Owl. So yeah, I mean that was my pick, and I felt that it was a great piece of PR work.
That's interesting that someone said they wouldn't have approved it. Do you know why that is?
Because it did not go by the rule book. It completely disregarded the fact that you need to you can't have like an entire length of text running in the TV space. It's never been done before, and people actually went and paused and read the entire script written on the screen. It was a 5-second spot. Everything in as an advertiser, your good sense tells you this is something you do not approve to put on TV. Yeah. But they did just that, and it worked for them. It reflected the brand's values, but it also generated a lot of like awareness around the brand itself. It was already in the news a lot, but this really like propelled it into a conversation happening around the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's so hard to stand out during the Super Bowl, but you're right. I really remember that one because it was so different. Well, thank you for telling us about that one. Let's move on to Anya. So your pick was a Diesel campaign, right? Can you tell us a little bit first, like summarize what the campaign was in case anyone missed it?
Yeah, so the Diesel campaign was called Enjoy Before Returning. And it was a campaign that basically allowed people to borrow clothes, diesel clothes, and wear them and then kind of return them. And it kind of played into this natural habit that I think a lot of people, myself included, sometimes have, where we kind of buy things, wear them once or twice, and then kind of return them because we don't want to wear them more than those many number of times. But I think what it did for me that was beyond just the actual mechanic of it was playing into this kind of irreverent nature of the fashion, well, kind of like almost taking the piss out of the fashion industry that kind of takes itself so seriously. And it's kind of really like every single piece of work that we see coming out of most of the leading design houses is always quite serious tonally, and they kind of take themselves very seriously as well. And I think this kind of broke that tension. And especially because it launched just before Fashion Week, I think it kind of did so many things. So tonally, it kind of broke that tension. Also, from a mechanics point of view, it got their name out there so much, because if you can wear Diesel for free, or kind of wear it and then return it, that increases its visibility before Fashion Week or during Fashion Week so much. So it gets their brand and their name out there, and it gets it photographed, and it basically shows up where you need to be. And the other thing is that I feel like Diesel has this reputation of doing these kinds of campaigns that challenge, or that mimic, that challenge, or like kind of have this humoristic quality about them. Like whether they did the go with the fake, I think that was what it was called, where they kind of sold, they found this insight that lots of people make and wear fake Diesel jeans, and so they made like a fake Diesel store. So I think it has a history. It felt in line with their brand tone of voice and opinion, and how they want to show up in the world as well. Because I feel like a lot of work these days, and specifically kind of the work that we saw, is trying to be cool just for the sake of being cool, and and it just kind of forgets, well, why are we doing this? Like, what's the intention behind it? Does it fall in line with who we are as a brand, what we stand for? And so I really loved that and it's also kind of democratic, because, you know, fashion can be really snobby and fashion can be really exclusive. And I love campaigns that feel more inclusive and bring everyone into the conversation. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, you're right. Diesel has a long history of being really irreverent and funny, but also kind of going against the grain as a fashion brand, and like bringing more people into its audience, I would say. Well, that's definitely one to watch. So actually there's another one who picked a Diesel campaign from this judging. So Senthil, you really liked the Diesel ad Francesca, right?
I think when we were judging the film entries at D&AD, and we're going through all the work, I think this is one piece that sort of everyone picked as a film that needs to really be shown, right? Something that will shine through, and it did right up to the end. Because of its bold commentary on culture. I mean, it's a fashion film, but from shifting from be stupid to having a little more purpose. Diesel has actually done a wonderful job with this for successful living, and it's actually an ode to freedom. It's a beautiful story and a beautiful narrative, crafted beautifully, and the film opens with a guy who's dressing up, putting on his Diesel jeans, and the song that you hear in the background's hey girl, don't lie to me, right? So it's crafted so beautifully from that very moment, and that narrative doesn't let you down. I mean, it takes you on this whole journey of the character, and that's how I think films should be made. And and for Diesel to actually keep upping the benchmark with every film they do, this was an absolutely fantastic piece, and a commentary on culture, right? And an ode to freedom.
Yeah, I remember that, being surprised by that twist at the end, where it turns out she's also, becoming a nun. And I think it was kind of provocative to mix those issues like transgender rights, but also religion, which you don't often see explored in the same film.
Even the craft in the end, as the music, as she walks into the church, and the sounds of the choir, the pickup, right? The music is crafted so beautifully that it leads you from a very fashion narrative to that almost pure Diesel space, or pure divine space, which sort of takes you into a different world altogether.
Yeah, it was very unexpected, so a great film for everyone to check out. Jean, let's move on to you. So your pick was a campaign I actually wrote about because it was here in the UK. So it's the Big Issues Raising Profiles, right? Can you tell us about that?
So actually, we spent a lot of time before we judging the work discussing what are we celebrating. Because I think if you know what we're celebrating and you look at the piece of work, it will come really clear to you why we picked that and as an excellent selection. So I'll just read that to you if you bear with me, the thing that we agree we're awarding. We, as a first e-commerce jury, what we're awarding is a celebrating the commerce creativity through an inspirational business idea, a redefinition of existing business models, an unequivocal human or cultural insights, an unexpected channel or platform, or with a fun and entertaining human interaction during the commerce process. And we want this to be done for business growth and society good in a year actually very special that humanity really need to demonstrate its value beyond the economic value of commerce. So that's the scene setting when we started to talk about the e-commerce category. And then we go through all the piece of work. And this is a piece of work I think we're growing to compare with all the other work. I just explained a little bit about raising profile in case you miss it. So this is a work for a big issue. It's a street magazine in the UK. So, you know, this is, if you've been to London and near the tube station in the morning, you see the big issue vendors near the tube station actually selling those magazines and giving those magazines to people. So during the lockdown, it's really unfortunate because they were unable to really connect and sell on the street, and they actually saw their livelihood erased. So this idea is recreating the sales model digitally on LinkedIn. So the agency used location-based data on LinkedIn to find the business people who work in the area where the vendors used to sell. And this reconnection is important because it reconnects them with old customers who normally will walk by every day. And they skill those vendors digitally in the process. So they're changing the perceptions on what big issue vendors could accomplish when the coronavirus didn't hit or the lockdown didn't happen. And it's so important because it's really creating data tech and humanity together in this business idea. It is transformational because it's not just riding on the trend of coronavirus and, you know, create a change. It's transforming the entire business model, and this business model will last even when the lockdown is not happening.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's kind of shaking up their business model. Do you think it has any implications in that sense for other similar brands?
I really think so. I think we talk about a lot about the difference between transformation and change. And this is transformational because it's like enabling a caterpillar to transform into a butterfly. Once you go through the process, will not be able to reverse back. Some of the changes that we'll see are the change of state, but when life go back to normal, it will go back to normal. So we feel that this will have a lot of lessons and learnings for equivalent industries or even other industry that need to go through the same transformation.
And from what I remember with the partnership with LinkedIn, they were also providing the big issue vendors with skills, career skills to kind of translate into the digital marketplace. So I thought that was really useful as well, because it wasn't just about buying the publication, it was empowering the vendors to transform their own skill set.
Yeah, and that's the reason why we think the fact that it's not just for enhancing growth at a special period of time, but for society good, because the upskilling of the vendors are really the key transformational component that's really enabling the society.
Well, thank you for telling us about that one. So Anais, I know you also liked the Big Issue campaign, but I thought we could talk about another one of your picks, which was Still Speaking Up by Publicis Mexico. Could you explain what that was about?
Sure, and agree with you, Jean. I thought that raising profiles was absolutely brilliant. There was a lot, and I live in the UK, so there was a lot of conversation around that. And the other one, Brittaney, as you say, that I really, really was struck by, and in fact, that all of us judges were struck by was Still Speaking Up, which is a campaign that has come out of Mexico. It's using deepfake technology, which is not in a sense a new technology, but using it in a really, really interesting, impactful, compelling way to bring a journalist back to life. So a journalist who was killed reporting on the drug situation in Mexico. His name was Javier Valdez. And the entire campaign was around this sort of fundamental idea that the truth will never die and that the truth cannot be killed. And so they used deepfake technology to actually bring him back to life. And the campaign revolved around the fact that he is still speaking up, that you cannot silence his voice and you cannot silence the truth. And one of the things that was really fascinating about it, he himself was a Mexican journalist. There have been 120 journalists killed since 2007. We're talking about the cartel situation in Mexico, which is just an astonishing, I mean, these are journalists, these are people who are going about their everyday job, much the way that all of us are, and who are being killed for it. And so the ability to use this technology to bring these people back to life and actually to have them still speaking about these topics and to just have that kind of spread across multiple channels. You know, I was part of the digital jury, but this is a digital campaign, but this is also a social campaign. This is a campaign that spreads across TV, across print. And I think the essence of this particular idea about the truth not being able to be killed for private interest is a really interesting one, because if you look at different things we've seen with journalism in just the past year, right? So you have Javier Valdez in Mexico, but also you have what happened to Khashoggi recently in Turkey, and you have the situation that has happened in Russia, and you have this whole idea of fake news and different pressures on journalistic practice that came out of the US. It's a global idea. And it's an idea that so many of us can relate to. And I see a lot of the other judges nodding their heads. So this campaign touches a specific situation in Mexico, but the use of technology, which we just thought was absolutely brilliant, and the core insight behind it, and also the creativity in which they brought him back to life and then used digital channels to actually get that story out and to really empower the truth, in a sense, through empowering this journalist, was incredibly powerful. So they brought him back to life. He was doing an interview, and actually they have snippets of what he said. And one of the judges had lived in Mexico at the time that he was unfortunately assassinated. And she said that absolutely every single thing to the detail was him. So the voice was correct. He absolutely, you could not tell that this was not him.
El 15 de mayo de 2017 fui asesinado por órdenes de alguien a quien no le gustó lo que publiqué. Pero aquí estoy, como me ve, hablándole.
That kind of technology applied for this sort of cultural good was really, really powerful.
Yeah, and I remember when when people first started writing about deepfake technology, there was almost this big fear around it and with the dangers that it could bring. But it seems that a lot of companies are now finding ways to really use it creatively and raise these really important issues with it.
The ways in which we start to use digital technology and digital platforms in, creative, but also really compelling, interesting ways is something that I think this competition can really shed a light on.
Yeah, and like you said, such a relevant issue for everyone these days. Well, thank you for that summary. So last but not least, Michelle, your pick was a Netflix campaign called One Story Away. Can you tell us what that was about and why you liked it?
So One Story Away was hearing the power of storytelling and how it's important for all of us as, for humanity, that for us to understand everyone's story, kind of it will make the world a better place. And that's at the core of Netflix values. So what I loved about the campaign was its simplicity. So it featured the notorious play bar of Netflix in the center of their ads, and it just heroed their content. So it heroed The Crown, it heroed When They See Us. So content relevant to the different markets, because the campaign featured in over 27 countries. So what was nice about it was how it became really local and authentic, quite simply. and just heroing the brand and its values. I just thought it was so well done. And all the judges within kind of the art direction category thought that as well, just because sometimes with art direction, sometimes it's substance, it doesn't have any substance, it just looks good. But this was substance with brand values as well aligned. It was just very powerful, but yet simple. And a lot of us will say, kind of, we wish we would have done that, especially with a brand like Netflix, which could have thrown a lot of money at it, and it could have been it could have looked very different, but just how they pulled it back and they made it so simple. It was just, we were all kind of like, we wish we had have done that one.
So sometimes less is more, right? Like they didn't over art direct it.
Yeah, they didn't. And especially in art direction, where we were looking for how does the art elevate the concept? You know, sometimes we were seeing things where it was beautiful, but what was it really saying? How did it add value? So how did the craft actually make the concept better? And with this, it did it, but it felt like it was effortlessly. So yeah, we really enjoyed that one.
Oh, that sounds great. This all sounds really great. Well, I was really curious, when you were all judging the work this year, you're doing so against a backdrop of an incredibly challenging year. Like, of course, there's the pandemic, but a lot of other changes have happened in the past, year since we had the D&AD Awards last time. So have you seen any kind of trends or issues throughout your categories that were affecting the work or changing the kind of stuff that is being made, do you think?
One of the key things that we observe in the backdrop of COVID is that there's so many companies trying to do things that's combining the pivot of both growth and good. Because, e-commerce obviously is a no-brainer in the year of COVID, that it's accelerating a lot of different experience. But a lot of companies are using the creativity to really connect a commerce experience with how they can help their employees, how they can help their consumers, how they can help people in need. And combining that both really make us feel that we're making meaningful progress as a community in the world. And so that's a really encouraging product and a trend that we're seeing in the e-commerce category.
And I bet if I had to predict, we're going to see even more interesting work in that category in the next few years, because I think COVID really accelerated some of that transformation for businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the first e-commerce category, I think what we're seeing is early days, not yet glory days. So there'll be more to come, and it's just going to be so interesting because this is a new creative canvas that every brand needs to live on.
Great. Well, Anya, what about you? When you were judging your category, did you see any common trends or themes?
I did. There was a lot of COVID ideas, and to Jean's point, there were so many ideas that were trying to do genuine good. But of course, with any kind of circumstance, it was also an opportunity for a lot of brands to kind of bandwagon and put stuff out there that was just more kind of noise, to be frank. When brands kind of take a step back from their immediate profits and their immediate needs as a business, and kind of look at how in times like these they can use their creativity to help the world around them, to help the community, and to help their employees as well. I think that's when you start seeing true creativity and stuff that actually sticks with you and inspires you. And I would actually personally like to see brands being more inclusive and telling the stories of people who are underrepresented and taking a stance on things instead of kind of lingering on the line between appealing to everyone and keeping all their clientele kind of happy and making like a larger cultural stance.
On that note of inclusivity, I think that, inclusivity and diversity came so much into the spotlight over the past year with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and other factors. Did you notice a real difference in the work you were judging in brands trying to be more diverse and inclusive, or are you still a bit disappointed in the lack of it?
It's one of those things that, everything kind of needs to change, and the old systems kind of need to change to accommodate various different things as well. So while we do see a campaign that kind of plays on a specific cultural movement or moment, like the Black Lives Matter movement, I wish I had seen the creative. I know this is not part of the protocol, but it is really important to see the people who made the work as well, and all these kind of little bits of the campaign that really ladder up to a bigger point, because it's so important where the money is going, who are the directors behind it, who are what is the production team. They're almost on set, if there are almost 150 people who are getting paid, what is the demographic like? Where is the money going? So is it, is it just the campaign, or is it beginning to end, everything that the campaign is doing that kind of is working towards that goal?
Anya, I think you touched on this, the importance of what comes after, because we're all of us here to judge work, to judge campaigns and activations. But I think especially when we come into topics of social good and cultural norms, it's really important to see. On a personal level, I would rather that brands almost do it more slowly but right, than turn something that's so important into like trend of the week and a kind of a bandwagony. Let's all just jump on board this topic, which I think was refreshing. We didn't see so much of that obvious bandwagoning, but then I do think it's critically important to, as Anya said, to know who is making the creative, but also what happens after. What's the result of that? What's the impact of that? Is it something that really positively affects the community in the case of raising profiles, or in the case of Still Speaking Up, or is it something that is purely a branding?
I wish I'd seen work that was bettering the community, or had like more of a long-term kind of plan. And I think in the specific like direct category, I think you do get quite like quick responsive work, but I wish some of it had been more long-standing as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Senthil, so you were judging the film category, right? I mean, it's a really interesting year to make film. Like in the beginning, as some people touched on, of the COVID pandemic, you saw a lot of films that kind of looked the same because the productions were restricted. But how did you feel overall, like from judging this category? Did you see any changes in how films were being made, or any trends that were brought about by the circumstances?
You could see a lot of reactive work. So there was COVID-related work. I mean, it was a sea of sameness. So that's probably why the other pieces like actually came out shining. Of course, among the COVID-related work, you did have some pieces which really moved you, and probably moved the markets as well in a positive way, right? But if you look at it creatively, and were they trying to do something exceptionally different, or something that stood out in form, while the function was the same, the form was not different. I mean, the storytelling form, or the narrative form. I mean, there was a sea of sameness in that whole set of entries, and that probably pulled them down a bit. So probably maybe it's a topical advertising kind of a thing, so which you should separate it out from the regular film category, because then you would be able to see different kind of work.
So Hira, tell us about your experience judging your category. Did it raise any issues or themes for you?
So one interesting thing that I picked up on, and I don't know if this was true for the other categories, was, I picked up two distinctive themes that were at opposite ends of the spectrum. There was obviously all of this purpose driven work, which obviously came from the need of people looking inwards towards a greater purpose, and then that spilling over into marketing. But I also picked up this theme of entertainment, right? Rogue entertainment, campaigns like GIF versus GIF, or that look from Popeyes or Oreo Doomsday Bowl, and these were pure entertainment-based campaigns. So, and I think this kind of spoke back to the fact that people were also looking for escape, and these were like two very, very distinct themes that came out of the work that we were judging. And then there was another one that kind of married purpose with entertainment, because I think people sort of got fatigued listening to, that serious sort of tone that purpose brings out. And then, you saw work like Burger King's Cow's Menu, which talked about environmental issues, but in a very lighthearted way. Or, Beowulf that asked people to, start voting, but again, in a very irreverent, a very lighthearted sort of way. So these were the themes that I picked up on, and I felt that it was very interesting to see a lot of entertainment-based work coming out this year too. Besides that, I felt that the reactive response category was very meaty, and I think we ended up with a lot of more short lists in there as compared to last year, and that was because of the kind of year that we had had.
That's interesting. I observed something similar just in the past year of writing about creative work. You had kind of two sides of the spectrum, like you said, like either it was really serious or really lighthearted and entertaining. Do you think, if you could make a prediction, like will we see more of one or the other going forward?
I think the world has seen a lot of serious purpose-based work, and the kind of year that we've had, we all need to kind of have this escape, and whether it's purpose married with entertainment or purpose brought to us through a lighthearted tone, I feel like that is the way down the road ahead.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think because people are really just weary and been through so much, maybe that's the way forward in talking about serious issues, is having a bit of levity to the discussion or making people laugh along the way could be, yeah, maybe that could work for some brands. So Anais, what about you? What did you think about when you were judging the work? Did you see any common themes?
I think coming from lots of common themes, so I would say one of the things that we were all looking for coming from a digital perspective is the core insight. Michelle touched on this, and we see this with digital as well in terms of things that use influencers, making sure that the craft does not obscure the intention. And that using a cool new platform or a cool new technology does not obscure actually what is the purpose of this activity and what's it trying to achieve, and did it actually achieve those things, and what's the insight that it's based on. And those things came out sort of again and again. We did see lots of social campaigns. I think personally, I was impressed with the caliber of, I think when we first went into lockdown, there were many sort of creative executions that I saw that felt a bit ham-fisted. And every single, to the point where you could almost get like a buzzword bingo going, like all the brands were being helpful, all the brands were saying sort of the same 10 words. And so I was a little bit hesitant about seeing a lot of that threaded through, but we didn't, in fact. So I think that there was a bit of an evolution in terms of how brands try to present themselves as helpful, or the insight upon which they are, linking that help. And that came through a lot in the submissions. There was an interesting discussion that we had because there were also a lot of there was a substantial number of what could be categorized as long form film for digital platforms, and there wasn't really a category for that. And I think that was almost looking at the different categories that all of us have judged, it's almost something that covers several different areas, or could cover several different areas, and there wasn't necessarily a natural fit. So there was a bit of discussion that we had as judges about is there a place now for long form film content that is expressed across digital platforms?
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually just saw something recently that Nike made in the UK. It's a 22-minute documentary that they made with Channel 4. Yeah, there's more and more of that happening. I wonder if that's going to be something that we continue to see. Well, so Michelle, you were looking at art direction, right? It kind of reminds me of, I think there's this long-running debate that's resurfaced recently about are craft skills within agencies on the decline. From you judging the work in this category, what did you think of the craft that you observed?
Well, what we noticed was that we didn't get much print. We got a lot of, and in art direction, especially in that category for D&AD, we expected to see a lot more print executions. and good ones, but we didn't. And we didn't know if that was the impact of COVID, and especially with lockdown, people not going out. So therefore agencies not wanting to put their spend on out of home in that same way. And we also noticed that there was a lot more film. We were judging a lot more film in art direction, more than we've seen before. So again, to note to Anis's point that, the film section was like double the size of the print. And,
Wow.
in terms of what we're reviewing, and also that niggly thing of, where was this film shown? Was it, was this a digital film, or was it a film on TV? Should we judge them differently or the same? Or what are the things we're taking into consideration for that piece? So that we noticed that the craft of the art direction in print wasn't as strong as you would usually expect for D&AD, and we wondered how, maybe why the agencies weren't putting their attention on print in the same way they have done before.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising. But what do you think of that question of, like, should work be judged differently based on where it was shown or what it was made for? Does that matter?
I think you understand the journey of how someone's receiving it, right? So if they're receiving it on their phone, or if it's in a cinema experience, the customer's doing it, it's a different thing. I do think we should be I don't like when things are copied and pasted. Oh, so we use the same video for social as we did for TV, as we did. I think there is a different consideration. There's a different experience that should be considered. So I do think that will allow the judges to have something else to consider when looking at the piece of work, rather than a copy and paste approach. We've got a film, so we're going to cut it up into parts to do the same thing.
Okay. Interesting. Before we go, I'd love to hear from each of you one key takeaway or lesson.
I would just say my takeaway was to think about, especially when it comes to art direction, how is the art direction elevating your concept? It's not good enough that it just looks nice. We're looking for the substance and the rationale of how your craft elevated the piece of work, the thinking.
Yeah, it can be really difficult to marry the two, I think, and make sure they're both really strong.
But they do it. Brands
they
do it, so it can be done. And this is D&AD after all, so we are looking for excellence.
Yeah. Anais, what was your takeaway or lesson?
It would be nice to see more thoughtfulness about how that activation uses the unique properties of that type of digital. So I talked about StillSpeakingUp and use of AI and use of deepfake, but it was very intentional the way that they used it. They didn't just take it because it was cool and a bit edgy. They were very thoughtful in terms of, here's what we want to express, and therefore this is the type of digital expression that will be most suited to that message. And I think that's what we'd hope to see more of moving forward.
Great. Jean, what would your takeaway be?
Then at the end, the thing that's most important is the authenticity. And consumer now is watching over you to make sure that what you say is exactly the same as what you do. And that connection and that authenticity is the key battleground to really win mind and heart from any audience that you want to engage with. So I think that's really important.
So Senthil, what would you say for the film category? It sounds like it's kind of hard to stand out in film.
If you want to stand out in film, I think it's all about the craft, right? I mean, and that we noticed across the winners. I mean, if you look at the winners this year in D&AD in film and film craft, you'll find that a lot of the pieces are the same. For exactly the same reason, right? So idea is important and gets you in the ring, but I think it's the craft that makes you stand out and hit the ball out of the park, right? If you actually aim for that, and I think craft is everything.
Anya, what would you say?
Yeah, I agree with Anais and Michelle about the intentionality behind it. I think in this era of very like disposable content and disposable ideas, I think there's the process kind of has gotten lost, and everyone's like, how can we just react, or how can we just like make something and put it out there, and like, oh, what's just like a cool idea? But I think thinking about how that links up to your core values, what the idea is, what its long-term impact is, the craft behind it. I think there needs to be a bit more intentionality and a bit more thought behind that as well. I felt like there were a few ideas that was like, I like to say, like taking a flight to get a ham sandwich. Like, it's just like, oh, who would actually, like, why would I download an app, scan the QR code, then get the some game, then go inside the game, then just to be told about this one thing. So I'm like, I think also that falls into intentionality about thinking about where your piece is, what's the media, what's the platform, who is it targeted to, and are they going to do it instead of it just being something cool, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a good advice. So finally, Hero, what would your key takeaway be?
I think, we've all been through a huge narrative shift, and I think moving forward, we get to decide what part of the narrative we're keeping. I think there was a lot of work that came through that had a lot of soul, and I think everybody's picked up on that. And I think that's the thread we need to take forward. We could experiment with the tonality. It could be more serious or more playful, but I think at the end of the day, we've seen a lot of work that has served a greater purpose, and we need to kind of continue on with that.
Great. Well, I think that's all we have time for. I just want to thank all our judges for joining me today and sharing your insights. And hopefully it was a really inspirational and useful session for all of you. I think you can check out all this work on D&AD's website, which I'll definitely be doing as well. So thank you again.